All right. Good afternoon. Thanks everybody for coming today. Today we are beginning the process of ending the failed experiment known as the Government Accountability Board. For the last 8 years, we've seen one problem after another, an unconstitutional investigation, serious lapses in the oversight of our elections, and in some cases, staff that went rogue. We created it with the best of intentions, but now it's the time to make a change. Together with our colleagues in the Senate, we have developed legislation that will promote accountability and transparency through 2 separate bipartisan commissions. And to talk about the details of the bill, I will introduce the author, State Representative Dean Knudsen from Hudson.
Thank you. Good afternoon. The changes that we're proposing are in 3 areas: in the operations, in the organization, and in the oversight of elections and of ethics in Wisconsin. The key concepts here are that we need to have our oversight be accountable and transparent. And so what we're doing is splitting into 2 separate commissions so that the Elections Commission can focus on clean, fair, and impartial elections. And the Ethics Commission will be involved in the ethics of public officials, in their public acts, in campaign finance, and lobbying. The organizational changes at the top involve having a new commission comprised on the ethics side of 6 citizen members. These members would be appointed 4 from the legislative leaders, the minority leader of each house, the majority leader, and the speaker would each have 1 appointment. In addition to that, the governor would have 2 appointments that be made from a pool. The Democrat leadership would provide 3 names from which the governor could choose, and the Republican leadership would provide 3 names from which the governor could choose. The governor's appointments would in turn be subject to confirmation by the Senate. On the election side, we'll have, in a similar vein, 4 citizen members appointed by the legislative leadership and 2 former municipal or county clerks, 1 of each party that would be chosen by the governor, appointed by the governor from, again, a pool of names put forward by the legislative leaders, 3 from each side. Those clerks would be subject to confirmation by the Senate. The leaders of each of these commissions would be an administrator that would be chosen and appointed by the commission, but subject to Senate confirmation. So that's the new leadership structure and oversight structure. It's important for us to remember as we go into this that what we're trying to have is an effective oversight that themselves has accountability and has transparency. They need to be accountable to the public, accountable to the legislature and those whom they're regulating, and they need to have transparency in what they do so that they have written policies and procedures that everyone can see and that they follow. In the past, what we've seen is there have been failures within the GAB structure. As the speaker said, it was a well-intentioned 8-year experiment, one that at one time was held up as a model for the nation. What we now see is that no other state has followed that model, and I don't believe any other state ever will, because the structure that we had was not sufficient to provide the kind of oversight and regulation that we wanted to have in a completely nonpartisan manner. As we have seen, they've failed to follow state law. They've failed to develop written policies. In cases where there are written policies, there's been a failure to follow those policies in areas such as a penalty schedule. And under this bill, we'll have them develop new written policies for negotiated settlements. That'll be a must, so that when there's a complaint, there's an actual process that everyone knows about that might resolve the complaint through a negotiated settlement. We'll also require that they develop policies for their complaint handling and investigations. There will be an additional due process for those that have been accused or are being investigated. When a complaint is made, the person or organization that the complaint is against will receive notice and have a period of time in which to respond. We'll have greater transparency in that ethics advisory opinions will be published. And there are other operational changes. These are just a few of them. So in those three areas, in operations, in the organization, and in the oversight, we feel this will be a significant improvement, providing accountability and transparency to the state of Wisconsin. Thank you.
We are also circulating a campaign finance reform bill that we have drafted in coordination with our colleagues in the Senate. The bill rewrites Chapter 11 as was really demanded by the courts over the past several years as decisions have been handed down. We all know Chapter 11, which is really what deals with campaign finance, has not had a major revision since it was created in 1973. Since that time, many court cases have come and gone, and the court has consistently made it clear that what the problem is that we have called, quote, the court has said it is difficult to decipher, obviously unconstitutional, a dizzying array of statutes and rules, and it's not updated to keep pace with rulings. The court has actually challenged the legislature to act, and that's what we intend to do. The court actually said, quote, Wisconsin's campaign finance law is in serious need of attention, unquote. Even if you disagree with the court decisions, we must update our statutes so people know what the law is, what they can and what they cannot do. The bill makes it easier to participate in our democracy by doing the following things. Number one, it protects a free and vigorous debate of candidates and the issues. The bill clearly spells out what is expected and requires frequent, detailed reporting disclosing all financial activity. In fact, this bill actually increases the amount of reports that candidates and elected officials will have to file, creating additional transparency for every single person who serves in public office. The bill also respects the line that is drawn very distinctly by the courts between express advocacy, where you are advocating for and against a candidate, and issue advocacy, where you are advocating for and against ideas. The bill protects the ability to engage in the political process by only regulating groups that are engaged in that express advocacy for and against a candidate. Following the lead of the courts, this bill protects issue advocacy from government regulation. Number two, as I mentioned, it also increases the frequency of reporting and transparency. The bill increases the number of finance reports filed. As an example, an assembly candidate will have to file 6 times during even years and quarterly during odd years. Much more transparency, much more accountability. It also is going to require disclosures for independent expenditure committees who go through that same process. If you remember last year under AB 225, the legislature on a bipartisan basis updated the amount that individuals could give to a political candidate. All reported, all accountable, all transparent. This bill will do the exact same thing. The cost of everything we know has gone up since 1973, including the costs of running elections. Contribution limits have not increased in more than 50 years. This has made campaigns more dependent on third-party advocacy groups. What we wanted to do is to adjust it for inflation. If we did that, literally it would go up by 5 times just to keep up with the pace of inflation. This bill does not do that. This bill only doubles the amount that an individual could give through that open, transparent process, similar to what we passed last session in the Assembly. As compared to other states, Senate and Assembly contribution limits will still be about the national average. Most states have higher limits. In fact, 5 Midwestern states have no individual limits whatsoever, and 12 do so nationwide. Our bill does not go there. We keep limits on, but we do update them for the times. This concept received bipartisan support last session, and we certainly hope it will again, because it brings more money into the light of day. Whether or not you disagree with Citizens United or agree with it, The very idea of having more money flow through an open, transparent process should be an idea that everyone can get behind, regardless of your political party. This bill also provides parity for corporate and union contributions. The bill will still prohibit the ability of any corporation to donate to any individual, but just like unions right now can donate to a political party, corporations would still have the same opportunity to do so, basically leveling the playing field in an open and transparent process. With that, we are happy to take any questions.
Mr. Speaker?
Yeah.
Does the Senate back this plan for the GAB?
Yes. Well, you want to talk about your...
We're very appreciative of the leadership of Senator Fitzgerald and Senator Vukmir. We've worked very closely with them throughout the process. They're both in support of this, and I believe that we'll be taking it up first in the Assembly, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's a joint committee hearing. The text of the draft to be released momentarily. We've got that for you. Yes, we've worked closely with the Senate and will continue to.
You talked about the need for accountability and transparency. One thing, when they created the GAB, they put a tremendous amount of secrecy on the organization, even put criminal fines on staff if they talked about certain things. Are you going to keep that level of secrecy in place?
We are, but with some changes. On the one hand, for staff, if there would be a leak, we're actually increasing the penalty that they'd be subject to if there was a leak. So when there's a need for secrecy, and we recognize that at times that's required here, then there ought to be. But there are other places where it will be somewhat changed. I mentioned earlier about advisory opinions. On the Ethics Commission, when an individual organization requests a formal advisory opinion, that will become public and be posted with the name redacted so that the decision or the guidance that they were given is available for others as well.
Does the bill give the legislature control over funding for investigations?
That's another excellent question. One of the problems that arose with the GAB structure is that we concentrated power, and I believe we concentrated it too much. They essentially had executive powers of enforcement, they had legislative powers in rulemaking, and they had judicial powers in sitting as judges for who is guilty and who's not. When you combine that with the fact that we gave them some sufficient funding, which essentially means they had unlimited funding in certain areas, that was a prescription for potentially too much concentration of power. The single change we've made here is that for investigations, any single investigation can go up to $25,000. If it's going to require more than that, then there's a new process by which there'd be passive review by the Joint Finance Committee, and the Department of Administration will be able to authorize additional money. In seeking that permission, they wouldn't reveal who's being investigated, but just details of the general nature of what that investigation is. Most of the years in the existence of the GAB, they've only spent between $50,000 and $100,000 in sum total on investigations, and most of them don't cost very much. There have only been a handful that would have gone over the $25,000, and so until that point, it would be just as it is now. But after that point, there'd be an additional level of accountability for the regulators so that they don't have unlimited funding.
What happens when the six-member board's deadlock?
Well, we believe that there will have an excellent pool of candidates to choose from. They're going to be highly qualified people that want to serve and come to an agreement. I think they'll get together. They'll have an exchange of their views, and like many citizen boards around the state, they'll need to compromise at times and come together, and I believe they'll be able to do it.
And if they're unable to, I mean, does it go to court or what? Because we've seen from the FEC, we've seen from the state Senate, when they're split evenly, they don't agree on much. If they come to an impasse, you know, what happens? Who wins? Does it go to court or what?
Well, it can go to court. Just as it can under the current law. I mean, the court system is still available. I mean, I could make the case to you that actually there's been inaction in many ways under the current structure, and that most of what should happen should be handled through having the written policies and the penalty schedule, so it should be pretty rare that the commission gets involved with the day-to-day small details of things.
Could you make that case? What inaction has has occurred under the current structure?
Specific inactions? Okay.
What should they be cracking down on if they're not?
Well, give you an example. The public has a right to know of the financial holdings of elected officials, and so we each have to file a statement of economic interests each year. State law requires that if you fail to turn that in on time, your employer, the Department of Administration, and the agency you work for is supposed to be notified and your paycheck withheld until you've turned that in. That's something that the GAB has never done. In the example of campaign finance reports, which, as the speaker said, we're going to be increasing how many of those are filed because we believe it's important for transparency to the public. GAB has had an internal schedule, a written schedule of what the fine should be. If it's filed a month late or less, it's supposed to be a $50 fine. If it's more than that, it's supposed to be another fine. And yet they've never been following that internal thing. Most of the people don't get any fine at all. And for those of you that are parents like I am, you understand that if you've laid down something that's supposed to happen but you're not enforcing it at all, you'll probably get more people that violate that. So there have been a number of areas where they've failed to act. The GAB, the judges themselves in 2008, 2009, and again in 2011, formally asked the employees of GAB to put forward written rules to deal with that exact thing, and the employees failed to do it.
What will happen with current management at the GAB or staff at the GAB? What changes do you anticipate?
We have a transition plan. This bill goes into effect June 30th. As soon as it would be signed into law, the legislative leaders and the governor could be involved in making their appointments. And when needed, that could go to the Senate for confirmation. When the commissions are formed, they in turn can choose their administrator. That can go to the Senate for confirmation, and that can all happen prior to June 30th. The spring election will happen under the old structure. The filing for office, the nomination papers for the fall of 2016 elections, the filing deadline is June 1st. Those nomination papers and all the ballot access will be handled by the current structure, and then the new structure goes into effect June 30th. As far as employees, we other than the top leadership, what I would call the oversight, the other incumbent employees will transfer over to the new commissions. The Department of Administration will be deciding who goes where, but they'll stay to ensure continuity.
When it comes to senior leadership, I mean, like Kevin's job goes away, what about the legal counsel and those folks?
Under the current structure, there was a requirement that they hire a legal counsel. Under this bill, that requirement is not included. Instead, each of the administrators that would be appointed and confirmed by the Senate would have the opportunity to select one non-classified employee to work directly with them. And after that, it would be up to the commission and the commissioners to decide who they hire and what positions they're in.
A lot has been made about making this transition in a general election year when there's going to be a huge turnout. And you're talking about getting this on wheels June 30th. We saw with WEDIC a pretty short timetable, and what a mess that was. Are you worried about that?
No, I'm not. I think it's a good time to do it. I think that we've got a plan in place that gives us the 6 months or so of getting the new organizational structure up and running, while ensuring that our elections run well until then and after then.
Will the new boards be housed in the same place as the GAB is currently?
Don't know the answer to that.
Okay, will they,
The bill, similar to what was in old law, the bill states that each commission will have their permanent office address in Madison, but other than that, they can choose to do business wherever they want to. I think it will be up to them and the Department of Administration to determine where they're housed.
will they have this, between the two, will they have the same level of funding as the GAB currently has?
The funding will be handled through the budget process for going forward. This bill will have a fiscal impact because we'll be putting up the new structure and incurring some expenses. I don't know what that is at this time, but we'll have that for you soon.
Can you elaborate on how the GAB hasn't been following the law?
Okay. I gave a couple of examples already. In the failure to follow the law for statement of economic interest, for the campaign finance reports. Couple of other important ones. One is they are required by law to, after each election, do an audit of the voter rolls of who voted, to check to see whether felons had voted who are not allowed to vote in our state. For 16 straight elections in Wisconsin, the Government Accountability Board failed to follow the law in doing that audit. Another one in the same vein would be that it's their job to audit the voting machines to make sure that our electronic mechanical voting machines are working as they should be. In the 2008, 2010, and 2012 elections, they failed to do the required audits of the voting machines. And the Legislative Audit Bureau in their audit of this pointed out that then even when they did it after that, when it was pointed out to them, they still failed to do it in the prescribed manner. So those are a couple. I mean, those are some where they were required by law to do that and failed to do it.
Well, Robin, in the campaign finance bill, are you gonna require conduits to report in the balances or?
No.
Would we be here right now if it weren't for the GAB's involvement in the John Doe investigations, and that's for anybody?
And I guess I look at it and say that the job of the legislature is to make sure that we hold each agency accountable. I think that we have had numerous audits of the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation. My colleagues have been working through the budget process and afterward on fixes because they believe there are changes that need to be made to make WEDC operate more efficiently. The exact same thing is true for the GAB. We have had numerous audits. We have seen that there are concerns with the way that they operate. I think that, the case has been made to me, and I really believe it, that rather than having the board be the ones who are in control, they have delegated much of their authority to the staff. I think that agencies should not be run necessarily in that manner, and that's why regardless of that process, that is something that we should have considered. Now, the fact that they went through that process, I think that did raise the profile. I think we have to be honest about that, to say, as they went through the process, they did some things that I think were patently wrong. And the process that they went through really is one that I don't think was intended when I voted for the GAB's creation, and many other legislators, I think, could say the same thing.
What process was patently wrong, in your opinion?
So I think as you look at the process they went through to ensure that they were involved in the investigations, I think that as they began the process, the idea was to make sure that we held people accountable, and I think that's something that will still occur under this bill as we have it. But the way that they were coordinating, the way that they used secret email accounts to avoid open records, I mean, all of those things seem to be kind of ironic, that people would be so critical of us doing some of those things, or the governor, but the very fact that GAB did some of the same things, it's glossed over. So I think there's a lot of issues like that that really need to change.
If Francis Smith appeals to the U.S. Supreme Court, they take the case and he is successful, does that vindicate and validate the efforts of the GAB?
We'll have to see.
Would it be the campaign finance limits, they go up starting the day the bill's effective, well, if it's effective, or when they kick in, next year, or?
The exact wording of the bill, I think it's 30 days after enactment, so it'll be about January 1st, we're hoping, or somewhere in there, so it would be going into effect for next year.
Speaker Boss, what about the coordination with issue advocacy groups? In your new proposal, will that be permitted under Wisconsin state law? Do you allocate for coordination with issue advocacy groups? And will your campaign be doing so?
Sure. Well, first of all, as the courts have already said, coordination is a totally constitutional way to express what you believe. If you want to coordinate with others to talk about an issue that you believe is important, you should have every right under the First Amendment to do that. Under this bill, it'd be the exact same thing.
Should be reported as an in-kind contribution.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Sorry, any limits on what corporations can give political parties or legislative campaign committees?
They would be the exact same limits that PACs have. So the exact same limits. So under current law, as an example, a campaign committee for the assembly can take $500. The ADCC, the Democrats or the Republicans could take $6,000, so it would be matched by that. So it'd be the same number.
I've released everyone.
Text of the campaign finance.
I think that's coming out at the same time today.
Right, we have, the links
Thank you,
to
everybody.
both bills at the bottom of this release, so if you guys can pick it up, that'd be great.